Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. I'm watching the ticker at the bottom show we're letting more participants in, and we have a good attendance today. So let's, just out of honoring everybody's time, we'll go ahead and start with introductions, and that'll give everyone a few moments to jump on from the waiting room, and then we'll get into the content. Good to see everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zach Yentzer. I'm the executive director of Tucson Young Professionals down in Tucson, one of the largest networks of YPs in the state. And I know Dawn introduced me to our panelists as a 2020 fellow, but I actually will call myself a 2020-2021 fellow because I was the 2-year COVID cohort that got accepted in 2020, and we actually got a double of the awesomeness of the Flinn-Brown program. So I was actually a 2-year cohort member. And Dawn and team, thank you for the opportunity to be able to really just kind of guide this conversation that I really don't think is going to need much of my help, because we have a number of amazing guests who live in this world and are going to give us a great legislative preview. So with that, I will just call on our 4 panelists, and we'll do some quick introductions and then get into questions. Jay, I know you are a longtime panelist of this legislative preview. We'll start with you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And yes, I'm happy to be back together with the gang here on the panel. We've all served in this role and have had an opportunity to speak with you all in the past. I've been lobbying for 25 plus years, strong background from my beginnings at the Department of Education and the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce for a number of years in there, and then been part of Veridus since our founding in 2008, and happy to be here.
Super, thanks as always, Jay. And then I want to go to a person who agrees with Jay most of the time, I've heard. Gaelle, let's get you in here.
I feel like Jay and I are going to find a lot more agreement these days under the new administration. So hi, everybody. I'm Gaelle Esposito. I'm a partner at Creosote Partners. We are a values-based progressive lobbying firm. And we're about 5 years old now, and really excited for this next session and to talk to you all about it.
Super, Gaelle, thanks. And I just want to reiterate as well, you might have seen it in the chat. If you have questions for the panelists, and I know I would love to leave a lot of time for more back and forth conversation, don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many of those that we can. Let's go to Lourdes. Thank you for being on with us and a frequent flyer of this preview.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Lourdes Peña. I'm with Triadvocates. Happy to be here and be part of this panel. I've been lobbying for the last 6 years, so time flies when you're having fun. And part of the work that I focus heavily with Triadvocates is our public sector clients and nonprofit clients. We do have a really good, robust, diverse list of clients from private, public, and nonprofits, but I do a lot on the public sector and nonprofit world. But prior to joining Triadvocates, I am a product of the legislature. I was an intern in 2012, best experience, life-changing experience. Soon after that, I worked as a policy advisor for the House Democratic Caucus for just over 4 years, and I joined Triadvocates in 2016. So happy to be here and looking forward to this panel and all the great things that we'll have to hopefully brainstorm together here.
For sure. And I know this one is being recorded, so all of the predictions are going to live on in infamy. And I hear Meghaen has a pretty much perfect score of predictions. So last but not least, Meghaen on the panel. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again. This is one of my favorite events. So I always like being welcome back. For those who don't know me, my name is Meghaen Dell'Artino. I'm the owner of Public Policy Partners. This is my 25th legislative session. I know I don't age. I think Jay and I were around under the last split government. And so I kind of look forward to seeing what that's like this round. And much like Lourdes and Jay and Gaelle, we are a contract lobbying firm. We lobby in all different types of spaces and issues down at the Capitol.
Super. Well, let's get into the questions. I have a few, and then as we always do, the Flinn Fellow Network comes in with their experiences and want to get into that. I was directed to not feel pressured for for you all not to feel pressured, I guess, to answer every question. But this first question, I would love to get everybody's thoughts on. And it's probably the most obvious question in the room, which is why I have to ask it. But we're about to have a Democratic governor for the first time since early 2009, if I have that correct. So it's been a minute. We're finishing up 8 years of a Republican governorship under Governor Ducey, and then, of course, Republicans before that. So we're going to have a Democratic governor for the first time in a minute. What do you expect will be the main differences stylistically and policy-wise between a Ducey governing style and a Hobbs governing style, and how does that impact the legislature? Let's do it in reverse order. Let's start with Meghaen on this one, and then we'll reverse it in how we introduced.
Yeah, I think that, Governor-elect Hobbs, right, has worked at the legislature. She was a legislator, so I think she's going in with an understanding of how legislators think and having to be collaborative. That's something that, Governor Ducey didn't have that experience. And so that's just a knowledge I think that she brings with her that will suit her as she takes over. I will say that I try to tell everyone this that asks sort of what to predict this legislative session, is that although we have a governor, who is a Democrat, we have a House and a Senate that is Republican. And so, neither side is going to be able to govern from the fringes of the party, and ultimately we'll have to work together. And I think that there are a lot of common goals. We actually, if you look at the bills that are ran and passed, most of them have bipartisan support. There's very little things that get done there that really pass without that bipartisan support. And of course, there's going to be those things. I'm hopeful, though, that my advice, I think, even though it's unsolicited, is how you start will dictate how long it'll take to finish, and how smooth or ugly the ride is. And so if we come in to 2023 with a sense of wanting to work together and wanting to have those bipartisan relationships, I think it will be much smoother. If we come in from both sides a little more hostile and aggressive on other issues, then eventually we have to come together, right, to get things done, but the path might be a little more difficult.
For sure. Yeah, and my next couple of questions, it's almost, Meghaen, like you saw my questions, because the next couple are definitely around what does legislating look like in this split government, and so we'll definitely head there. You made a great point. I'd love to get Lourdes' opinion on this, given that Governor-elect Hobbs has legislature experience. Governor Ducey didn't come in with that experience. How might that make legislating and governing different for us Arizonans watching?
I think that's a huge factor, and I could be biased because of my own background working inside at the legislature, but I think having that experience and walking those hallways and being in the minority caucus before, and whether or not you're brought up to do a negotiation for a budget or not, who do you include in those conversations, I think it gives her such a advantage to some degree. Now, that being said, let's remember we have 90 legislators and the highest turnover in legislators ever. So the dynamics and personalities of who she's going to be dealing with is different. And the style, I forecast, and I hope that we're going to see more of a collaborative type of governor. And I think they understand. If we see her track record when she was at the Secretary of State's office, and prior to that, when she was in leadership at the state Senate, she understands the value in bipartisanship and collaboration and early conversations. So I think back to Meghaen's point, how she sets the tone is going to be very important, how she comes in and opens the session. that's also going to be part of what she's walking into, right? Is she coming on a fresh new start, or is she coming after a new special session, whatever the case may be? So yeah, I think it's more collaborative. I think I foresee, as far as policies, I would say I don't feel that there's going to be a ton of massive changes, right? I think she's made it very clear she wants to continue economic development growth. She wants to continue more focus on education. She wants to protect the elections. So, I mean, I don't think there's going to be a massive difference or like a clean slate type of thing. I think she has a lot of institutional knowledge, so we'll probably see more collaboration, and she probably has a little bit of an edge on how to negotiate with those folks from both sides of the aisle.
Gaelle, I want to get you in on this. You can disagree with me for sure. As I was kind of looking at Governor-elect Hobbs' record when she was a candidate, it seems like her legislature, the stuff that she pushed through as a legislator, were very important, but also very niche topics or issues. Any learning curve for Governor-elect Hobbs to come in and get to work on the big, hairy, audacious stuff like affordable housing, water, border. Any thoughts on that? And do you agree with my assessment?
So I would say that the simplest way I can describe it is that Governor Hobbs is going to have to be much more hands-on than Governor Ducey. And her experience as a legislator will contribute to her ability to be very successful at that. I think I would disagree with you in that I think, Governor-elect Hobbs, even though her name might not have been on, signature accomplishments like that, by virtue of the nature of, being a legislator of the Democratic Party in a Republican-dominated state at the time, she was certainly involved in those negotiations and in those issues. And I think where that really is going to play out in a difference with Governor Ducey on policy issues is that you're going to see those issue areas where she has a lot of strength play out in the agencies in how she, her attitude towards the governance of those and the leadership of those institutions. And so I think you're going to see much more active and engaged agencies trying to be out there, trying to fix some of the problems in some of them, like corrections and DS or DCS. And so I think that's going to be where we'll see the most substantive difference.
Got it. Jay, I want to get you in on this. I'm starting to hear some perspective that Governor Ducey had a luxury of being a little bit more detached. I'm hearing less bipartisan, less compromising than a Governor Hobbs will have to be. Is that a fair assessment of maybe the difference in styles or the way that we're going to see things work? What do you think about what you're hearing?
Frankly, I don't think we have any real good idea. I mean, it's I think we need to expect a train wreck right out of the gate in terms of what to expect from this legislature and the governor's office running smack dab into each other, because both sides have a settle to score. Now, I don't think it'll stay that way. Meghaen referenced back to the Napolitano era, and I can think back to that. And there was a lot of storming that had to go on. I mean, don't forget that, last time we had this split level of government like this, we saw more vetoes than, record number of vetoes. A lot of those vetoes are on purpose. It was exactly what the legislature was looking for. And we're in a far more politically divisive era right now. The legislative numbers didn't shift all that much, shift at all. But as we know, the Republican legislature majority shifted to the right on the political spectrum. And you can't avoid the fact that they've got some desires that are going to run into the priorities of Governor-elect Hobbs. Now, I think at the end of the day, right minds will prevail. You will see some bipartisanship. But I think this first session is going to be a bit of a wild ride, and that's what we should be looking out for. I don't know whether, I don't think any governor's ever got an easy job one way or another, and I don't know that there's any way to be detached from the policy that's going on. It's just a different set of policies. Governor Ducey walked into $1 billion budget deficit. The opposite but equal problem, believe it or not, is that, Governor-elect Hobbs is going to walk into a $2.5 billion one-time budget surplus. And God knows that makes sessions go really long.
I want to get into more of kind of what are we previewing around issues, what might get passed, what should get passed. I want to get there in a second. But Jay, you kind of segue to my second question, which is around what is the split government relationship going to be like? Here's a tweet that I read the other day from a conservative or Republican tweeting. It said this: "We have the majority. She, meaning Governor-elect Hobbs, needs our votes to get anything done, not the other way around. We're conservatives. We'd be perfectly happy if the government sat on its butt," didn't use that word, "for 4 years. But if she would like to advance any agenda items, then she's going to have to deal." Right. And I'm sure there's, it's not very nuanced legislatively, such as the nature of tweets. But part of me wonders, is that going to be kind of a split government attitude, kind of to Jay's point? Anybody, Meghaen, Gaelle, Lourdes, anybody want to jump in on what is the tenor going to be going forward?
I'll kick it off if it's okay. I think when we talk about the new legislators coming, right, and folks that have no experience governing before, there's always a shift, or there should be a shift when you go from campaigning to legislating. And it's the same tweet that you just read could be tweeted from the other side, right? It takes two to tango. So she has the veto power. The legislature has the narrow majorities for the Republican caucus. And I also want to emphasize, we need to remember, not all Republicans are created equal, not all Democrats are created equal. So now you have a governor, I think, coming in that typically you think of two caucuses, Republican caucus and Democratic caucus. I feel that she and her team are going to have to be negotiating and working with 4 caucuses, right? The progressive Democrats, more moderate Democrats, the far right Republicans, more moderate Republicans. So it's going to create a shift for sure. And my perspective is it's going to be a learning experience for all of them. And when we have so many brand new people that, to some degree, the election and the way they run their campaigns were in a lot of very black and white issues, or a mentality of, I'm going to do X or Y and that's it. This is my way or the highway, from both sides of the party. It's going to be a big awakening when they come into those rooms and start thinking, oh, I need a count. And it's that 31, that 16, and that governor up there that I need to get my ideas forward. And at the end of the day, they all have some sort of agenda or priorities they want to do. So if they want to get those through, it's going to take a lot of really self-awareness of what can be done for those issues.
I think it's just a misstep, to be honest, because at the end of the day, like, she's got this pulpit, right, that she is going to use. And so if this idea from the Republicans, which I am one, right? So if the idea is, well, we don't care, we're going to send up everything and let her veto it, or we're just going to shut down government, or we're going to not fix the AEL and hold hostage, 1.1 million little lives in this, in this state, then she's going to use that to her advantage. And I think that, the Republicans are going to have to understand that, right? She's the governor. She's not just one legislator, right? People are going to want to talk to her. They're going to want her to be on their television shows, their radio shows, right, in their businesses. And she's got this pulpit that they might not be able to compete with. And it's very easy, I think, for her to be able to say, like, the legislature's being obstinate on these things. I want to move the state forward. I want to fix the homeless problem and the affordable housing crisis. I want to make sure our kids have the resources that they need, but the legislature is being obstinate. And, I can't, we need your help to move. And ultimately who that hurts, because you saw it in this election where it was supposed to be, a big, huge Republican wave. It wasn't, right? And I think that if the party stays with that sort of that mentality, then they're just going to have more of the same of what happened in this election cycle in the next 2 years. And when you get down there and you got 50,000, instead of teachers, it's going to be 50,000 parents, right? Saying, don't hold my kid hostage. Or you have, their constituents calling them saying, I can't find housing, for my family, or, whatever the issue is, they're going to, I think, soften to those issues and realize that, okay, I'm off the campaign trail. Now, I've taken this oath of office and it's my job to govern. And that means that I have to do what's best, best for everyone. And I think ultimately that, maybe I'm hopeful or Pollyannish, but I think, people who want to serve tend to want to serve. And eventually, that will prevail in the minds. And that might take a while. I think, like Jay said, it might take 5 months, 6 months to get there, but I think ultimately we get there.
Gaelle, I want to pivot to you to start getting a little more granular. I felt like the obligation was to start very stylistically because we have a lot of change, whether it's a Democrat in the governor's seat, split government. But Meghaen, you brought up something that I did want to ask about. Gaelle, we'll at least start with you. We're hearing potentially, at least we were at the beginning of the week, about an AEL-oriented special session. Maybe next week. Give us an update on that, what your expectations are. I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, we also had today the governor, doubling down on he's not going to do it until he sees the votes. A convenient excuse when everybody tells him we have the votes. Either way, what I have heard, and others can confirm what they're hearing as well, is that the real problem here is unrelated items being tacked on to the call for the AEL, including things like trying to reduce the authority that the newly elected Democratic statewide officials will have in the coming years. Of course, further attacks on the ballot initiative process, things like that, completely unrelated to the issue at hand. And so I think those, unrelated topics are the things that are bogging us down here in these last few moments. But I'm going to say Meghaen's going to know a little bit more on what's going on here than I, or maybe Jay. Ooh, I saw Jay on mute. That's exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna go to Jay next. So Jay, Meghaen, if you have anything to
go ahead, Meghaen. Gaelle teed you up, so.
Well, I'm just going to say, as the person that was in the room when the deal was made on AEL, there absolutely was a deal. I'm going to say that far and wide because I kept my word, right, and did what I was supposed to, and I expect Governor Ducey to do the same. Whether or not he does is on him. This excuse that the votes aren't there. The votes were given on October 5th. They are there. They continue to be there. They've been counted and recounted and recounted and recounted. I would say is entering into a special session, there are a lot of things I think that a lot of members would like to see happen before Governor-elect Hobbs comes in. And, is what I have been told for the last 5 months is, show me the votes on AEL. I would say probably the same thing on those issues that, we shouldn't be holding AEL hostage to other sorts of issues that maybe want to move forward from the caucus. And if they can get those votes on those issues, on the merits of those policies, then they should be included in the call, right? I mean, that's at the end of the day, I think that is a legislative and governor's office determination, right, on what issues they have the votes for and what can be included and not included. But to tie this back to the AEL, to tie this back to something that was agreed upon in the budget, I find to be unfortunate. And and I know everybody is like, why are you so surprised in it? And I think I'm surprised because, you know, I think when, again, when you have when you have appropriated a budget for schools to spend, then you should allow them to spend it, right? Just letting this money sit in an account somewhere and sit there, you know, while schools, you know, collapse or try to figure out how to cut the budget creates chaos that just doesn't need to be there. And all of the other things that are created are all the same things that'll happen next legislative session, right? The same types of negotiations that will go through Hobbs. But at the end of the day, you're running out of time, right? I mean, this is something that has to happen next week. There's a lot of moving parts to put together. It's unfortunate, and if it doesn't happen, it's going to monopolize the first 3 months of the next legislative session.
Meghaen, just to stick with you for a clarification question, you hinted at some of it, but we kind of just jumped in and said AEL. But for, I guess, completing what is AEL and why is it important and why does it need to be done sooner than later? Could you just give us like a minute and a half of context?
Yeah, it's what's called the aggregate expenditure limit. It's a limit that was set in the 1980s, right? Really antiquated, didn't have school choice, didn't educate students the way that they are educated now, that says you can only spend so much. And once you're over that, right, the legislature can allow you to spend more, but it takes a 3/4 vote in order to do that. I will say in 2020, there was 2 bills that were ran actually by Republicans that would have solved, it would have sent it to the ballot for voters to re-vote on. And that was no problem. And then 2020 happened, and now it's kind of become this political football. But I'll say it over far and wide, our kids shouldn't be used as political footballs. And I hope that, you know, cooler heads prevail and we can move forward on fixing it.
Got it. Lourdes,
Yeah, just, you know, I don't know, Meghaen was in the room, so I can't speak to what deal was made, et cetera, but there's definitely a broken promise aspect to this, which is we appropriate dollars to the schools and then we tell them they can only spend 80% of them. And I think I'm the only one here who doesn't have a school district or teacher, you know, employee, a district employee client, so to speak. But I've been in this space long enough. And right now what's happening is the AEL is just getting really expensive. Every several minutes I get a new text with some new idea that's on it. I think at this point we're talking about increasing ESAs and a legislative appropriation of federal funds and erecting a Trump statue in Wesley Bullen Plaza or something like that. That's kind of where we've gotten to at this point in time. And, you know, the reality is that I think once we get out of the pressure cooker, get past the new year and into the regular session, you know, some real governing can occur. So nothing good happens when we try to rush policy in the way that is being discussed right now.
Lourdes, I want to stay on education for just a minute, maybe go over to you. I think I saw it in the Republic this morning. It's no shock to anyone that Governor-elect Hobbs is going to have a very different agenda on education than Governor Ducey. But get into that for us a little bit. What do you expect that might look like legislatively? What is her policy agenda on education?
Well, I think she's been always, if you look at the history and the background, right, when she was at the state capitol, it's this idea of coming back and making sure I think teacher shortages is a big issue. Everyone can understand that. That's been a top priority for her since before she left the Capitol. It's been on the campaign part of how do you retain and recruit, how do you recruit and retain your teachers? To be clear, we don't have a shortage of certified teachers. We have a shortage of people and certified teachers that want to go into the schools, charters or districts, doesn't matter, to get in front of a classroom and do the work because of the work environment. You know, a lot of people and a lot of the focus has constantly be on the pay, but it's also on the work environment. So I think she's definitely going to come in pretty strong with the teacher shortage issue. How do we address that? I would assume, you know, she was on the same paper talking about the Capitol lawsuit and how she sees the issue where, you know, this is an existing lawsuit that the schools have been there's a lawsuit against the state because the schools were not receiving equitable funding in their view for their capital and maintenance of their buildings. I think there might be more there. I think generally speaking, it's going to be very much more in the sense of equitable funding as well. How do we do that? What does that mean? I think everyone has a different definition for that. But probably really elevate the respect that needs to be given to the folks in the schools, given either teachers, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, it doesn't matter. Just a recognition to those positions that really keep the education system going. So, and then of course, AEL, if there's no special session and there's nothing there, she's going to come in and have to fix that immediately, right? That's going to be on her plate. And I can see that she's going to, I would foresee that being a top priority for her. Part of the frustration there that we all share with Meghaen, seems like they keep just changing the goalpost and continue to use that as leverage. And for a governor that really got elected and pushed a lot of the education funding, and that's why we're to some degree in this problem right now because of the investments that were made. For someone who came in and said we want to run government at the speed of business, AEL does nothing to help our schools plan and run their schools at the speed of business. They have no projection in their planning for budgets. It's really difficult. It's a barrier. We need to figure out not only a fix for this temporary issue, but a permanent fix, because it's just an arcade method that we're dealing with.
Here's another question I would love to get everyone's brief thoughts on. What is the one big issue that both parties are going to feel pressure to get something done on? And I guess the context of my question is, I think certainly Democrats are going to have their issue set and Republicans will have their issue set. But what is that issue or two where both parties are saying, yeah, we got to get something done on this year, certainly, you know, with the budget that we have. Meghaen, maybe I'll start with you.
I think probably water and housing are the two things that, you know, they're going to focus on most. And I know people keep thinking we did something on water, but we've done things that are long-term, right? That set up a long-term plan that's 10, 15 years out. We still have an immediate problem. And that is going to hit not only economic development, but also housing, right? And how we build housing. And so it's all tied to water. And I think what Republicans and Democrats have in common is that they both love the state of Arizona. They both want what is best for the state, and having a solution to water is the only way that the possibility for those visions exist on either side of the aisle.
Somewhat
yeah.
related, but I'll just jump in. I think homelessness is going to have to be something that needs to get addressed. And obviously there's connections to affordable housing there. I think there's also a lot of connections there to a lot of other underlying societal problems that need to get addressed. And if we can start focusing on, you know, the symptoms that come about when we have, you know, educational gaps, when we have poverty gaps, when we have gaps in our behavioral health system, et cetera, then I think we can start addressing those kind of underlying issues. And they are economic development issues as well. I mean, I think you can talk to just about anyone who's traveled the country recently, and, you know, companies and people are fleeing those places where homelessness hits you right in the face. And whether it's right or wrong, our kind of natural human response to something that's different or that is scary or what have you is to run away from that or to fear it. And so I think we've got to address homelessness, and in doing so, may actually find some solutions to some of the other, you know, real issues that need to get addressed.
Before I go to the other two panelists, I'm not seeing any questions in Q&A. Maybe that's just my, like the level of privilege I have to see them. Maybe maybe our hosts see them, but would love to go there and answer your questions. And we're kind of rounding the corner towards that more open Q&A. So please throw your questions, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. Gaelle, Meghaen mentioned what I thought would be the top two, which is housing and water. Do you agree with Meghaen and Jay with his addendum, or you think there's another direction?
Oh, no, I think those are definitely two of the top issues that folks will have incentives to address. I think other potential areas of collaboration are, reforms to the Department of Corrections, which right now is really struggling in that we've seen a lot of bipartisanship about addressing those problems lately. I think another issue could be opioids. We need to revisit some of the laws that were recently passed and take another hard look at how to address this crisis, greater emphasis on harm reduction, et cetera. So I think those are a couple other areas where we might see some opportunities, but housing, water will take up most of it.
Lourdes,
I fully agree. Water, housing, homelessness, I think those are all intertwined, and I think they're part of the economic development. When you have big companies coming into the state, those are the top issues they're asking. And the other issue that I would say is workforce. So how do we provide the workforce to those businesses? We have recent announcements that are great, but how do you make sure that we're going to have the employees to go ahead and do that job? We recently just got engaged with a new client of ours, Procter & Gamble, and all the meetings we're having with community partners as they're coming in talking about the project they're going to do in Coolidge is water, housing, workforce, water, housing, workforce. How do we do that? And I do see that being that's bipartisan issues. That's not a party line issue. How you get to those outcomes, it's a different way of different approach, but I think that those are the top issues for sure.
Jay, maybe a little bit of a kind of a one-off question before we move on, but related to this. My question was about what are those bipartisan priorities? I want to ask a question related to the Republican majority in the Senate and the House. Are we going to see election security as a continuation from the last legislative session? There was a lot of props on the ballot. It was talked about ad nauseum in the last session. Are we moving on from that, or is it going to continue to be an issue?
It's absolutely you're going to continue to see it. I'm trying to pick my words carefully. So you're going to see it. Whether it gets very far is a whole other question. I think there are many in the Republican Party that are sick of fighting over it. There are also some folks, even if they're true believers, who realize this is not a winning fight for Republicans if they want to try to maintain a very slim majority in the legislature. So, I think you're going to see it. You've got, Wendy Rogers, who is chair of the elections committee. And then I'm trying to remember, is it Jackie Parker on the other side who's going to oversee elections? So, yeah, so these are not going away. These are folks who have very strong opinions and very active Twitter feeds on this topic. So, and I'll do my best to answer maybe one of the questions that's up in the box that's somewhat related in terms of what I do think we'll see that will have bipartisan support will be something to potentially speed up the process for counting ballots. I think there's probably some room in there to find a sweet spot in which we're not, making it more difficult to vote, but that we're kind of putting some reasonable boundaries about when you need to turn in your early ballot so that it doesn't create this huge problem going forward.
Nope. You're not going to find agreement on that, Jay.
I would like to just say that, Florida didn't stop counting until I think it was November 19th. Everyone looks at Florida. It's just the difference in Arizona than some of these states are we had really highly contested races, right? So like it was easy to say, you know, Governor DeSantis won because he won by such a large majority that it didn't really matter that he kept counting. But I do believe the first thing that's going to happen, right, during legislative session is you're probably going to have some hearings over, you know, Pinal County running out of ballots, you know, Maricopa and, you know, those issues, because I just don't think that the legislature can help themselves. And frankly, I think it happened under, you know, when issues happen, like I remember Helen Purcell coming down there, right? So I definitely think that elections are going to be a hot topic, but I will agree with Jay and probably disagree a little bit with Gaelle. I do think there's things that you can do that both may do that allow, you know, whether it's on-site tabulation or, you know, other ideas like that, that might not be seen from the Democrat side as like hindering somebody's ability to vote. But also speed up, because the only reason that it doesn't is that, you know, since 2020, more people are dropping off their ballots instead of putting them in the mail. And those require signature verification if you don't have to show ID at the ballot box, right? You do have to verify a signature, and that takes time. So, you know, there's going to have to be some give and takes on some of those issues if we do want to count ballots quicker. And I'll say, like, this isn't the first election where votes have been tight, right? It was tight in 2020. It probably will be tight again. And so, you know, I think from both sides of the aisle, they probably don't like the fact that it's one way on election night, and then they're, you know, worried for the next week and a half on, you know, did they win or not? And so I do think there's probably some common ground that can be found on there if both sides come together and find some things.
I will say, Meghaen, you are right that there can be common ground. I think it has to be based in not making it more difficult for somebody to cast their vote, return their ballot. And that was the piece there that Jay had mentioned, that I was saying you're going to see a hard line in the sand against, is limiting when people could drop their ballots off. I think some of the things you did mention there, though, there are opportunities on to speed that up. I think the real problem, though, is, you know, they put the grifters in charge here of these committees, you know, and so they are going to continue to churn that money-making machine for them, and continue to spread conspiracy theories that encourage people to hold on to their ballots and drop them off day of, and you know, extend the length of those counts instead of mailing them back when they get them. Because, you know, that really has been the thing that has continued to drag out the counting process in 2020 in this cycle as well. Their own misinformation campaigns. So we'll see.
I have one kind of big question left to ask, but we're getting a lot of good questions in Q&A, so maybe we go there. And Lourdes, I wanted to start with you. There's a question: are there any predictions with the returning Tom Horn to the Department of Education? Lourdes, let's start with you. If anybody else has anything to add to that, feel free to jump in after Lourdes, but I think it's a good question. What do you expect? Great question.
That's a great question. What do we expect? I think, to quote Jay, I have no idea. Let's be clear, there's some ideas that we can have, right? This is a known person. This is a known former superintendent of public instruction, former attorney general. I would say the things that I predict that might be a priority for him personally, based on the campaign and based on limited conversations we've had with the transition team, are things like we have seen in the national push for education policy. You know, ban on the so-called CRT issue. There's a history with him getting involved in curriculum with Mexican American studies. There's a history or a talk about the value he may see for social and emotional learning. So I think curriculum could be one of those things that we can see some sort of push there. I like to remind folks, including the department, and we had this conversation with the current administration, the role of the department is to oversee schools and to be an agency of service to the schools. while you're an elected official and you can put your own agenda and you can pursue your own issues, at the end of the day, it's really more programming. So I certainly hope that as they're building the transition team, they can be thoughtful in keeping those programs that have been effective and really good for our students in place. It's going to be really difficult having now, we talk about the governors shifting from Republican to Democrat. This was a Democratic to Republican race. Like it was all over the map with our voters, right? So I think it's going to be really challenging. I do have a lot of hope and optimism when I see of our education chairs for both the House and the Senate, that I think there's going to be really good work to be done there, maybe with policies, but it is a little bit unknown until we know fully who stays with the department, who doesn't. Concerns about a lot of institutional knowledge being gone because of the new leadership at the department. That's I would say it's a little scary for me right now.
Anybody else want to get in on that question?
Since we're still recording, I'm going to say it's going to be a corrupt shit show, because that's how Tom Horn has ever been. So, get ready for that.
I think from the school perspective, the bigger concern and this is kind of to Lourdes's point, is the reality of the agency is, 95% of what it does is administration. It's not, there's really very little policy that gets done there. You've got a bully pulpit and you can kind of, either make yourself a hero or make yourself a nuisance. But when you've got changes in administration and you've got significant changes in leadership, you're going to see a lot of disruption to the schools. I think you're going to see, some of the responsiveness that's going to slow down, at least in the short term. And, right now schools are kind of at their wits' end, and so those disruptions, just add to a litany of, other issues around not being able to find teachers, not being able to find bus drivers, the realities of inflation, and all the other issues that they're facing. So hopefully the disruption is kept to a minimum, but that's what I think the schools are looking out for.
I will say I go into my daughter's classroom every Friday morning because they have a substitute. She's a substitute while her teacher's on maternity leave. And I think we should make a state law that, every parent and every elected official has to go into a first grade classroom. Because I think you might understand, right? And I think it would be great for Tom Horn to do that, or anybody that works for him, because I think you start to understand really what's happening inside of a classroom and all of the things that we've required our teachers to become, right? I mean, I know it because we lobby it, right? We hear it, but to actually experience it, and understand that you're trying to teach a lesson, but at the same time, you got a kid that has, maybe some behavioral, challenges, and you have, somebody over here that's got ADHD, and you got somebody over here whose pencil's broken, and you got somebody over here that needs to get a glass of water. And I'm telling you, this happens like every day, and that poor teacher's trying to manage it all while still trying to give our kids, a quality education. And I really hope that we go back to the days where we really respect and admire our teachers, because they do amazing, great work. And I hope that office isn't used as a tool against them. And I hope it's, used as what it's supposed to be, which is a tool to support them, to support the schools, to support the students, to support the parents. And because that's why it's there. And frankly, that's why you should run for that office.
Another question in the chat. We have two right now. One I'm going to leave to the end because it's the prediction question, which feels like a great way. How long will the session go is, I think, a great way to end this. So I'll leave that to the end. There's another question here. Abortion legislation. How much will that issue play into either the conversation throughout session or anything legislatively produced out of session?
We will likely have a special session at the beginning of the Hobbs administration to repeal the Civil War era total ban on abortions. I think that is a campaign pledge she made, and one that I would expect that we will see, and that hopefully we will see some agreement on repealing. I do think that on the flip side, I would expect some sort of referral effort from the far right legislators on the issue of abortion to try and get voter protections around that issue. So we will see a lot on this, I feel.
One other panelist want to tag with Gaelle on that?
Thankfully, this is not an area that I get to lobby, but my sense of it, just as an interested observer, is I don't know that you're going to get anything done in a special session unless you're going to refer something to the ballot. I think no matter what, the solution is going to come down to something that gets referred to the ballot. That's just where the politics are right now, particularly in such a contentious session.
Yeah, I think on this issue, Jay, I thought you're gonna say, fortunately, I don't have to deal with that. Because you're kind of lucky, but you do have to deal with it indirectly in many ways. No, I think that's one of those issues that it's definitely going to be top of mind, no matter where you stand on the issue, no matter what your views are on that topic. We have conflicting laws. People have recognized that there has to be some sort of clarity given there. Going back to, is there a special session or not on it? We started at the beginning of what tone you want to set, what type of framework you want to put forward. I do see Governor-elect Hobbs giving her background and her history, that being a top of mind issue. And whether it is a special session or something else, I think she's going to push the envelope to try to get some clarity there, at the bare minimum, to set the record straight and put folks on record as to where they stand. That being said, it's probably one of the most controversial issues with that legislature to start off with. So when we talk about setting up the tone and how do you collaborate and start working on things, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how soon they pull it. But I think that's going to continue to be a top of mind for the entire, session.
There's a couple of other good questions in the chat I want to get to, and then we'd probably be remiss if we talked about issues and policies, but we didn't talk about the resources that this legislature has to work with. And we've mentioned that it may be as difficult to legislate with a really bad budget as it is a really good, pot of resources. So really quick, maybe Meghaen, I'll start with you on this. If one other panelist wants to jump in, give us kind of the lay of the land on all these topics. What kind of resources does this legislature get to work with? And does that make it easier or harder?
Are you talking about resources as like budgetary resources, or? I know that she's coming into some one-time dollars, but I think that at least from a Republican legislator perspective, I think they're also hypersensitive to what's going on in the economy. And looking at some of the things and investments that they've made over the years, like education being one of them, right? There's a lot of things that actually come in year 2 and 3 on special education and poverty. So making sure that they can fulfill the budgetary promises that were delivered last legislative session is probably going to be their number one priority. I completely agree with Jay. I've always had a harder time in legislative session when there's a lot of money than no money. Like the session just goes longer because you're trying to figure out how to spend it. But there's a lot of things that you could use for one-time, dollars, including resolving the capital lawsuit, right? A lot of the things inside that capital lawsuit are one-time issues that she could put some money behind in case she wanted it. Conservation issues as it comes to water, which I know a lot of Democrats were fighting for. They got some of it done last legislative session, but I think that they'll
and Republicans
on the conservation side. I thought that was a Democrat ask, but okay. But either way, there was some money there, for conservation. I think, depending on what happens with Prop 400, there might be some more investments that have to come and on the transportation side, affordable housing. A lot of these, a lot of these ideas that both parties are looking at take dollars, but what's the difference between ongoing dollars and one-time dollars, or little gimmicks where it's one time, dollars, which probably makes Jay cringe as a budget person, right? He doesn't like to see that. you know, is to be seen. And I think you're gonna, I think Lourdes said it at the beginning of the call, or Jay or somebody, but I mean, this legislature is a little different than the last legislature. You have members who are completely okay continuing, you know, doing a continuation budget, and you don't have some of the players that are willing to hold out or have those other political you know, motivations. And so I think it's going to be challenging to get to that budget deal at the end of the day. If you have like a Liz Harris who holds true to what she's been saying, right, she's going to vote no on everything, then you're looking, you know, you're looking at Democrats, and you need a Democrat to sign the budget. And so although we have resources, most of them are one time, and a lot of the ideas that at least I'm hearing out there are ongoing funding things. So
just for sake of time, because I think we're 4 minutes out from the end, and I want to leave time for that rapid fire prediction question and answer. There's a really great question about water in the chat. So let's maybe pair that with kind of Meghaen, your answer on budget and one-time funds. What is something nitty-gritty about water? What is something that we could actually short-term tackle on the water issue with the budget and or one-time resources that we have? That question is correct or makes sense. Anybody?
I think you may have to find some people to pay for their water. You know, I think frankly, you've got a bunch of one-time funds, and if you can set up some structure, you know, there is some water out there, it's tied up, you know, where folks have access to it and others don't. And obviously it's a hot commodity. And so, you know, I think if we can add another $1 billion to the water pile, that puts an ace in our hand in terms of negotiations with California, with other folks along the Colorado, with tribal interests, et cetera. And so I think we're just going to have to get accustomed to buying some of the water that we need until we can so-called make it ourselves. And that deal for a desal plant hasn't come through yet, but that was, you know, some of the thinking around the initial $1 billion worth of funding that was set aside last year.
Lourdes, anything of Governor-elect Hobbs' water plan that could get done in this budget cycle?
Full disclosure, I have not read the water plan. I am blessed not to have to deal with water policy. Others, more smarter people out there deal with it. Anecdotally, I'll share, you know, there's a lot of talk about desalination, and there was a recent trip that legislators took to Israel to see how Israel's doing. They have very innovative ways as to how they're dealing with their water issues over there. And what I heard from a legislator that attended the trip was the Israeli folks said, until you really look in Arizona at the use of your water, you shouldn't even look at desalination because it's such an expensive plan. But anyway, I don't know that detail, but the real quote that was given to me is like, when we look at our usage, it's about 20% of the water use is municipal use. So again, I'm not the expert here, but we just got to be looking at how the water is used, and is there any compromise between our many stakeholders in that can be better structure. I don't know, that I'm just wasting time here. So let me move on to another panelist.
No worries. Let's appreciate all of your time and thoughts and consideration and knowledge with the 60 seconds of overtime we have left. The question everybody wants asked and answered: when is the last day of session? How long does this thing go? It is being recorded. Meghaen, we'll start with you.
December 31st, 2023. No, it's just going to be continuing. No, I mean, I think they come, you know, I think it's going to be like the last 2 years, where at some time at the end of June, where everyone's tired and wants to get out of here, you know, the deal's cut, everyone's kind of given up. And so I think you're going to see it right at that last week in June. And if it's not, then I think you're going to see a continuation, and we're there forever.
Gaelle, you're up next.
Yeah, Let's just to give an actual date this time, June 24th, and then 3 special sessions after that.
Lourdes.
Oh God, I'm looking at my calendar and not making any traveling before June 30th for sure. Yeah, I think last week of June. My prediction, I'm not going to give a date. My prediction is that we have I'm going to be really I don't like to predict, but we're going to veto a budget before we have a real budget.
Wow. Okay, we'll let that one kind of hang out there. Jay, last but not least.
Yeah, so I think everybody's right. Quite frankly, I think it's going to be, June 30th is a Friday, so we're going to go right up to the end, maybe even into Saturday morning. There will be at least one budget vetoed, that's for sure, because that's part of the process. But I think the kicker here to pay attention to is what Gaelle had mentioned, which is the notion that it's really not going to get done, that there will have to be some special sessions after the fact, as things change. So we'll see. There's a lot of folks at the Capitol who would be willing to continue, or just let government shut down. That would be for some, that would be a proud accomplishment. So
I do think you might see a veto or a budget go up and then a quick sine die. So the only thing she could do is call a special session. She does it. So.
train wreck.
Train wreck. Yay.
On that positive note, let's close there. Again, want to honor all of our 54 attendees. It's 3:02. We know you're all busy. Thanks for hopping on to this legislative preview. I'll give Dawn or the team a second to hop back on if they want to share any final words. But for me, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the ability to just kind of ask a bunch of questions and hear the experts' answers. This has been really informative for me. And just want to say one more time, thank you. I'm getting the signal from the centers team that we are good to go. So with that, we'll close this out. Y'all have a great legislative session, and we'll hang tight with you. Thank you all so much. Have a great day,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mac.
Holidays.
Bye.